So the first film that we're going to review today is Malcolm and Marie, directed by Sam Levinson. It's currently on Netflix, so you can check it out there. So Steph, why don't you tell us a little bit about the film?
Okay, so it's the latest release from Sam Levinson, who I think a lot of people will know from his hit series Euphoria, which is, I think, going into its second season. Um, he's had a few credits throughout the years. If anyone's seen any of his early work, he sort of jumps in between genres and kind of explores different terrain through all his filmmaking. And he goes into this one in a way kind of like a kitchen sink drama on screen. So we have John David Washington, that was kind of made a name for himself primarily this year through Nolan's Tenet. And we have Zendaya coming back again. She worked with Levinson as well in Euphoria as one of the stars of that show, and she's also quite big. I think within quite a lot of the new Spider-Man releases. So this is so it's pretty much the tellings of an event unfolding within one kind of space, one house over the course of an evening, and it starts when John David Washington's character Malcolm is coming back from a celebratory kind of premiere of his new film, which, you know, up until he's returned home has been very highly praised from the critics that were also attending the premiere. So it kind of fluctuates in between how Malcolm himself kind of perceives and has experienced the evening to how his partner Marie has kind of felt quite distanced from it, and it really unravels into how a lot of kind of kitchen sink dramas on film unravel. It goes into different avenues of power dynamics, and it addresses kind of a select few of major conflicts which kind of collide within the two characters. So it's pretty much an exploration of relationships in that, and not to give too much away, but it's very much one where you kind of, it's kind of, you know, it's like a game of Wimbledon with this thing. You're going back and forward between these two characters' kind of feelings towards the relationship and their life as such, just now within Malcolm's career and outside of it, and how that's kind of affected them both.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's good to note that largely the film was obviously shot this year, right, during lockdown in one setting. So it's very much one location, two people, and you know, and an attempt to do something high production value, you know, with a well-known director. So what did you guys think of the film? I'll save my points till afterwards.
I'll start off with the positives first. I think in terms of the way the film looks, I think they've done an extremely good job, particularly with the... I mean, even independent of the restrictions, it was made under the need to kind of like have a very, very scaled back crew and all the rest of it. I think they've done a pretty good job. I think it was shot on 35mm in black and white, and I think the decision to do that pays off. I think it's a very good looking film. I've got a lot of time for the performances, in the sense of what they make of what they've been given, and we're going to come back to that in a minute. I think it's... I've not seen Euphoria. Is the which like Zendaya's won? I think it was an Emmy. She won an award for that. So my experience of her on film is pretty limited. So it's a far more interesting performance than I've seen from her in previous films, which, in all honesty, basically extends to the Marvel Spider-Man ones. John David Washington, I think, when he's got a bit more to chew over, he's a very engaging presence, right? Because I was a big fan of him in Black Klansman. In Tenet, I thought he may as well have been a cardboard cutout, but I think that's more to do with that film than his performance. So I think they've got a bit more... He's got a bit more to work with here, and they have an opportunity to, kind of actually try and put their stamp on it. The problem is the script, and I think what Sam Levinson wants to say with the film, it's just not... I've got to be honest, I don't think it's terribly interesting. That's really what it comes down to. it's one of these films, and maybe I've just got a low tolerance for this sort of thing. It's one of these films where the two people talk to each other in the way that, in my experience, no two real people ever talk to each other. Now, to an extent, is that what he's going for? Are they kind of like two sides of his thoughts? You know, the sort of like the arrogant, ambitious side, and the, you know, slightly more realistic, questioning, insecure side, and reality, they reflect each other. But I mean, sure, I think there's something like that going on, but that doesn't make it any less tiresome to watch. It's very cyclical the way this goes. They are passive aggressive to one another, then they blow up at one another, then they're nice to one another, then they start becoming passive aggressive again, rinse and repeat for an hour and 40 minutes. So I think there's plenty to like about the film in terms of how it looks, and I think he does an extremely good job of mixing up the space and the way he moves the camera around the space. I think there's plenty of good stuff going on. I just think it can't really disguise what is a fundamentally pretty repetitive and uninteresting script, to be honest. Would be my view on it. Now, also, there's nuance there, and we'll maybe get into that, but overall, that's kind of like the big win and the big shortcoming of the film for me.
Yeah, I would agree with that completely. I think going back to, you know, from like Sam Levinson's career and things, I'm a big fan of him as a director, especially, you know, his early work. I think more the way that he kind of puts his own stamp on quite well-known genres and makes them almost his own. And he is, I think, as Jim was saying, the performances really are the thing that kind of carries this film along, because I think that with everything that he does, he puts a lot, he gives his actors a lot to do. I think that's centrally when he makes a lot of productions, he puts the actors kind of in the front of the vehicle when he's making his art, and I think it pays off because he has a lot of room to nuance and write around these sometimes overplayed genres and make them transform in a way that a little bit different. He kind of, it's almost like he's not afraid to have this shared authorship with the crew and cast of his films, and I think that really shows in his style. But like Jim was saying with this one, and I have quite a lot of time for kind of repetitiveness in film if it has a purpose. The issue, I think, like Jim was saying, is in the writing itself. It's in the script. I think when you are doing something, especially that involves two characters, you know, there needs to be quite a lot of organic kind of conversation within scripts like that, because I think that if you're trying to do a wider talk about, especially in this one, about people in the art world and the filmmakers versus the critics and the everything like that, I don't think that there's anything wrong with talking about that as a subject, because I think it is something that is a good thing to bring up, especially in the way that art's kind of taken in now, especially in lockdown, the way that we kind of consume by the second. But there needs to be something more in a story between two characters than just a critique on mass culture. It doesn't hold together a script that's going to keep you really quite as focused as you would be. I think that the thing is, I think that because the performances are so good, it could have easily gravitated to much more kind of colloquial, normal language between these two people that do very, very much feel alienated by each other, and it just never really grasps that in the centre of it all. So I think I'm pretty much just kind of re-saying what Jim said in his critique, but I think, yeah, the main issue with it is in the language. I think if the screenplay itself was a little bit more coherent in the messages and the relationship that it wanted to build and analyse, I think that it would have actually been a much more enjoyable experience, and one that people could have connected to a lot more, especially in times of isolation. There's a lot of those sort of themes swirling around in it, even in the setting. But yeah, if you want for the aesthetic, it looks amazing. I think the whole everything that's been chosen about where it was set, how it's been filmed has been very carefully thought out, and it has created kind of the undertones and the atmosphere that I think that it did want to achieve. So I think that it's a bit of it's one of those things where it's got the makings of everything to be really good, but there's just one screw that wasn't really, wasn't locked in tight enough to make it run as smoothly as it could.
See, I completely thought that I guess we're all saying it's not good, but I have to say I really strongly responded negatively to this film. So I don't see these positives. I do see the fact that it was shot in film, and in the sense that it's a film, and it's very it's about film and it's shot in film. It's like, oh, great, but I go back to a lot of conversations that Jim has about films made of films, and, also pretentious filmmakers talking about it, thinking about The Souvenir as one example. And this could not be more annoying, of a bunch of filmmakers talking about films, art house films in film history, that I did know those references and whatnot, but I just found that conversation to be unrealistic and unrelatable.
No, completely.
As a filmmaker myself, and I didn't know enough, I guess, because I just watched it knowing nothing, and I think that was the best way. And I was like, this doesn't feel like two people actually having a normal conversation, like you're saying, but it also felt like a play that was just poorly written. And yes, the performers were very attractive and they were very good, but they weren't really committed to the actual material, because the material was unrelatable. And I know that, I think we briefly mentioned that it frustrated you that film critics are getting mad about the criticism, but I wouldn't ever imagine someone to be like that, in response to in response to an evening like that. It just didn't feel like I'm the one who supported, Marriage Story, I believe. I'm not sure how many people liked Marriage Story in this, but it goes back to me saying to Netflix, I really love their documentary strands and a lot of stuff they're doing, even with television and stuff like that. But the feature films, this reminded me a lot of that Charlie Kaufman film that we had. I'm
exactly the same. Yep.
I'm thinking of Ending Things, where it's like, who in the production of films is saying, I'm going to give really famous directors the opportunity to just make whatever they want, and we're not going to look back at this and say this needs to be edited, this needs to be thought over a bit. And it's just it's frustrating me now, because this is maybe the fourth Netflix film that I'm good famous director, terrible film.
Something that's interesting on that note, were you saying you're frustrated about it? I was looking at the some information about the production, and it didn't start as a Netflix thing. I think Sam Levinson, they just made it, and then Netflix bought it after. They outbid quite a lot of other studios. They paid quite a lot of money for this. It was $30 million or something like that.
I mean, and I don't know if it comes down to, again, I've never seen Sam Levinson's other work, so I have no way to relate to that. I just, from that first experience, I found I wouldn't want to see any of his other work. It really did annoy me. And as you said, it was boring. And I have a lot of attention and time for films that I would even watch The Breakup again, So I don't mind people breaking up on camera, but not with just diatribes. It's like a tweet rant or something to me. So it felt like what people were doing on Twitter during lockdown, I don't know.
I'm glad you mentioned I'm thinking of Ending Things, right? Because now, as you know from when we did the review show, that I didn't like that at all. A lot of people did, right? But what I will say is there was at least some attempt to abstract that away from Charlie Kaufman's head, right? That's what I will say. This is basically just... It feels a little bit like Sam Levinson just speaking through the characters, and it's films like that where I have a limited amount of interest in it. What I will say is, I think there are some ideas kicking around in these diatribes that I think are worth discussing or are worth trying to address in the form of a film of some sort, right? The idea of the interpretation of art versus what the maker's intention was, right? Because something that's notable about that, and as I say, I think there's a lot of film critics who've got a little bit too sensitive about the anti-critic rants in here, but one thing that is interesting about them is the fact that the Malcolm character, he has a go at some critics who disliked his, I think his last fictional film, I can't remember, but he also has a go at critics who are actually praising the current one, but they're doing it in a way that he thinks is stupid because they don't know how to talk about a film by a black filmmaker. Now, without getting into the weirdness of this being expressed through a character written by Sam Levinson, who is a white director, I'm going to put that to one side for a minute. But that idea about who gets to interpret art and how could actually be an interesting thing to look at, and it could be an interesting thing to look at in like one of these films about films, right? I just don't think this is that film. It's not done like you can't just state a few sentences about it and then pretend that you're getting into the weeds of it, like you're actually looking at it. You're just stating the problem, and that's a problem which I think anybody who would engage with that in the script is already aware of that problem, right? So you don't gain any insight, you don't say anything by just restating the problem, right? Because if somebody isn't aware of it, you're just saying it exists. Big whoop. If somebody does know it exists, you're not saying anything about it. Again, big whoop. So it just feels like a bunch of things. And actually, Amanda, your Twitter analogy actually isn't too bad. It feels like the sort of thing that a director would post as like a thread on Twitter in slight annoyance or something. It's not a script.
It's honestly something I probably read in a review once I finally watched it, and then saw like what the heck am I watching, and why am I disliking it so much? Because yeah, it's pretty. And the set design it's all my kinds of type. And I love a chat about film criticism. And I think maybe it's just as I'm, watching more films, these conversation films about like highbrow, like nonfiction comes to mind, that, French film about like the loss of literary, like the book industry or something. It's just, if it doesn't work, and it doesn't, I hate that word, just authentic. Oh, it's not authentic, but it really just felt like I was watching these people, that they were reading something that wasn't them. That's how it felt to me. So it just wasn't enjoyable to me.
To go back to, I think, like the problem of authenticity and what Jim was saying about, the whole kind of Malcolm's character being quite angry at reviews that are misinterpreting his work and saying that it's political due to the fact that he's a black man, and the problem with Sam Levinson being a white man that's writing the script. And I think that it's so weird that this film's kind of came just now, because we have this whole discourse going on just now, especially about if you're writing about people of color or you're writing about LGBTQ characters, you can't really have a very fixed authorship. You have to have people, if you are outside of those kind of communities, you have to have people within them to kind of guide your writing. And I think it's that thing kind of. It's funny because the film itself it talks a lot about authorship and who made the biggest, like who has led this train of thought in someone's head that's made it art, and what does that mean? Do you completely own it? Is it really your credit? And it's one of those things where I think that perhaps if Sam Levinson had a few more people involved in the writing of the script, that because it almost feels like he's digested things that are happening in our political climate, but he's taken fragments of all of it and kind of just throwing lots of jargon into a void and hoping that something sticks in the centre. There's no real linear argument to anything. It's just we'll take bits and pieces of the discourse that everyone else has been talking about just now within the art world, and that will make a concrete point. And well, it doesn't really at all.
I 100% agree with you on that, because I think that the authorship issue does matter, and it doesn't, but it also is, if it was even well done, and or like it was a continued within the, and it was interesting. I would even like make more liberties for it, but I just didn't. Like I said, the only idea I can say is a Twitter is disorganized, and then nobody edited it, and that's kind of Netflix's like fault there. Like nobody
Yeah,
at the top of, like, where I'm starting to think is streaming. A streaming company shouldn't be like a film production company if they're not going to put executives in there to say, you know what, we might need to tweak this a bit. We know you're a famous person, but it might not resonate.
Yeah, because don't get me wrong, there are in that script, right? Despite the right old kicking I've given it during this discussion, right? There are fragments of interesting ideas in there, right? And the one which it picks up and then it drops, like, almost, it brings it up late and then drops it almost as quickly, is you become aware of the fact that maybe part of the reason that Marie is so annoyed that she's not been thanked as the inciting incident is because basically Malcolm seems to have mined her experiences in order to create the narrative of this fictional film, which of course we never see, right? But there's the feeling that her experiences have been exploited, and there's actually, again, there's an interesting idea there, like whose experiences can you adapt to create art? Can they be your own? Can you do other people? There's an interesting idea there, in particular in the dynamic of this relationship between two people. But again, it skims the surface of it. It doesn't go anywhere with it. It's used as a vehicle for her to get annoyed after being passive-aggressive for a bit, then they shout at each other, and then they, and again, it basically becomes the reset button for this cycle in the film. It has no interest in going any deeper. So between that and interpretation, again, there are interesting ideas kicking around. It's just it doesn't do anything interesting with them, and that's exactly the same problem I think that the Charlie Kaufman film had, also a Netflix one, as you've pointed out. So it's more a case of it just leaves you feeling very unfulfilled. Like it's very intellectually malnourished. Really, it's maybe the way I'd put it. It doesn't really go particularly deep in a satisfying way on any of these ideas, and ultimately, therefore, why should you care about it?
Sam Levinson's first film kind of explores. I think this is one of the things that he's quite drawn to in the stories that he tells us. He likes to explore the kind of the dark roots of very close relationships. And his first film, Another Happy Day, it had mixed reviews. I personally really liked it. I think the reason that one perhaps worked for me when this one didn't was because I think when you're exploring these really in-depth psychological boundaries between characters, I think that the way to avoid too much criticism in what you're saying is not to try and draw such fixed conclusions about what you're doing, or and I think that in Malcolm and Marie he was kind of trying to do that, but from throwing a bunch of ideas into kind of like a whirlpool and seeing what kind of draws focus. But I think that if you're going to do that, you kind of have to have a very established set of things that you feel very comfortable speaking about, and something that's very universal that you can relate to a lot of people that are going to be watching this film. Because if you're going to do a film about kind of arts versus commercialism, arts and the art through exploitation, and the filmmaker versus the critic, you need to find a lot more human terrain to talk about these issues than just ones that are going to appeal to the art world that are going to be looking at it. Especially if you're doing a film with two characters that need to guide this all the way through. I think that the actual emotions and the actual dynamics in the relationship outside of Malcolm's career and Zendaya's inspiration for his film, a lot of it isn't just it's not as explored as any of that, and that arguably would be the most interesting part.
I agree, but I think now it will make me go back and watch Euphoria and look at Sam Levinson stuff. The only thing I knew about Sam Levinson is he was the son of Barry Levinson, who's obviously a very, very famous filmmaker. Some great films coming from there, but I mean, as far as I'm concerned, this felt like a cinephile film gone wrong. And, after, like I said, too many nights, like in lockdown. But, and Jim, I'm never going to stop loving the Oscars. But if this is nominated for an Oscar and or gets anywhere near winning, I will throw something. I will throw something. Because I'll love to hate it. But anyway, on that note, it is on Netflix, and if you want to see what we're talking about, please go check it out.